Hi everyone, it's Mike again, and this short YouTube is going to give you a quick look at earnings per share calculations. So to illustrate earnings per share, I'm going to use one of the exercises that was assigned in Wiley, and that was exercise 1113. So in order to calculate earnings per share, you need two basic pieces of information. The first thing you'll need is earnings that are available to the common shareholders. Now, earnings is synonymous with net profits, so when I use the word earnings or profit, it's interchangeable. And why do we need the earnings available to common shareholders? Because the common shareholders are last in line. We normally calculate earnings per share in relation to the common shareholders. And that's because preferred shareholders have a guaranteed dividend. So the earnings available to the common shareholders is the last in line, or the last amounts of earnings that are getting closed off to retained earnings and therefore available to the common shareholders. So the second piece of information you're going to need is the average number of shares that were outstanding during the year, and I'm referring to common shares. So why do we need to know the average number of shares outstanding? Well, it's because companies can and do issue shares during the year. So the number of shares outstanding can change. So we use the average number outstanding during the year, and in the illustration of the problem, I'll show you what we mean by the average number outstanding during the year. So here we are. I've got my numbers for exercise 1113. I have Chinook Corporation, which started its year on December 1st and ended on November 30th. And they started the year with 61,000 of common shares and no preferred shares outstanding. And they had the following changes in their share capital. They issued some shares in February, some common shares. They issued some preferred shares in September, and they issued shares in exchange for some land on November 1st. And then they reported some profits, which get close to retained earnings, and they declared a quarterly cash dividend to the preferred shareholders. So obviously, when we close the books for the year, we close dividends to retained earnings, just like we close profits to retained earnings. So if we close profits of 356 and we issue dividends to the preferred shareholders, whatever's left is therefore available to the common shareholders. To summarize, net profit and dividends both get close to retained earnings. Dividends to preferred shareholders are earnings that are not available to the common shareholders. So we usually calculate net profits minus dividends to preferred shareholders as the earnings available to common shareholders. So using my numbers from Wiley, if I want to calculate what the profit or earnings available to my common shareholders is I know I have a reported profit of 356,100. So that is the first piece of my equation. Now, I know that I issued 20,000 cumulative preferred shares for $500,000, and the cumulative refers to the dividend that these preferred shareholders are guaranteed. So they're guaranteed a $1 per year dividend, and that is normally paid off quarterly. So we'll see later on in the problem that they declared the quarterly cash dividend. So that quarterly cash dividend will be 25 cents. So in our calculation, if I want to know how much of my earnings went to the preferred shareholders before my year end, well, I only have one quarter between September 1st and November 30th. Therefore, I have $1 times a quarter, or 25 cents, times 20,000, and that gives me total profits available to my common shareholders of $351,100. Now, step 2 of the calculation is relatively straightforward. If there were no shares issued during the year, it's easy. Just take the number of shares outstanding at the beginning of the year, and I'm always referring to common shares because that's what the earnings per share calculation represents. If, however, you had shares that were issued during the year, you need to figure out, well, how many of those shares were outstanding and for how many months in order to calculate an average number of shares outstanding during the year. So here we are, and we're going to calculate the number of common shares outstanding during the year. I began my year with 61,160 outstanding common shares, and I issued 15,000 on Feb 28th and 6,009 on November 1st. So given that our year end is November 30th, I issued shares on Feb 28th. Those shares were outstanding for 9 months. And the shares that I issued on November 1st were outstanding for 1 month. So the calculation is an average. The ones that were outstanding at the beginning of the year, they're outstanding for 12 months, so that's the full amount. My 15,000 were outstanding for only 9 months, so I'm only going to be taking 9 out of 12. And the same logic applies for the shares issued on November 1st, which will give me a total number of, or an average number of shares outstanding for my year of 73,260. So here we are, we have our two key pieces of information: earnings available to common shareholders, average number of common shares. We calculate a number of $4.79 earnings per share, which is available to the common shareholders in the form of retained earnings. And the company has a choice to keep that in retained earnings or pay some of it out as dividends and go forward with the business. So I hope this short video has helped you understand a little bit better earnings per share.